He called me crying from a closet. Said his arm really hurt. But when I showed up, Harold met me at the door with a smile. And a threat. "He's asleep," he said, like I hadn't just heard my nephew whisper, "They keep hitting me." And when I spotted that bruise through the upstairs curtain, Harold stepped closer and hissed, "You have no rights here." I thought that was rock bottom, until I saw Darlene, in uniform at County Services, smiling as she rerouted my abuse report into the trash. But what they didn't know? I'd spent 15 years documenting everything, and I was about to turn their paper trail into a noose. My name is Mark Ellison, and I'm 45 years old. Most days you'll find me at job sites or in my workshop, running the contracting business I built from nothing but calloused hands and determination. The sawdust hangs thick in the evening air, while Springsteen croons from my old radio, keeping me company as I finish the day's paperwork. My late brothers-in-laws, Harold and Darlene Preston, think their grip on my 4-year-old nephew Caleb is untouchable, thanks to their connections at the county office. What they don't know is that 15 years of running my own business taught me to document everything. Every receipt, every photo, every timestamp stored in triplicate. My fingertips brushed the fresh bruise on Caleb's arm last Sunday, and my jaw hasn't unclenched since. Sometimes the quietest men keep the deadliest receipts. But let me start from the beginning. The radio was playing Hotel California when my phone lit up that Tuesday night. I was finishing trim work on the Henderson kitchen remodel, the kind of detail job I usually save for after hours when no one's around to interrupt. The caller ID showed Caleb's number, a prepaid phone I'd slipped him last Christmas, telling Harold and Darlene it was just a game toy. "Uncle Mark?" His voice crackled through static, barely a whisper. "They keep hitting me." My hand froze on the chisel. "Where are you right now, buddy?" "In my closet." A rustling sound then. "My arm really hurts." Every muscle in my body tensed. "I'm coming over. Just stay quiet, okay? Please hurry." You know that moment when your whole world shifts? When you realize you've been playing by rules that don't mean a damn thing anymore? That was mine. I didn't even bother locking up the job site. 20 minutes later, my truck's headlights swept across the Preston's perfect lawn, all neat edges and expensive landscaping. The kind of yard that says, "Upstanding citizens live here," to anyone driving past. But I've learned that the prettiest facades often hide the ugliest truths. The porch light snapped on before I hit the steps. Harold filled the doorway, all 6'2" of him in pressed khakis and a golf shirt, like he'd been expecting company. His lips curled into what might have passed for a smile if you didn't know better. "It's almost midnight, Mark. What could be so important? I need to see Caleb." "He's asleep." Harold's voice had that practiced smoothness, the kind that comes from years of telling half-truths to people who can't fight back. "You know better than to show up at this hour." Movement caught my eye. A curtain shifting in the upstairs window. For just a second, I saw Caleb's small arm in the hallway light. Even from the ground, I could make out the yellowish-green tinge of a healing bruise. My fingers curled into fists. That boy called me crying. Either you let me see him, or what? Harold stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "You'll make a scene? Give me a reason to call Sheriff Matthews about a trespasser harassing my family?" There it was. The threat wrapped in small-town politics. Sheriff Matthews played golf with Harold every Sunday. Their wives ran the same charity committees. One call, and I'd be the unstable uncle making trouble. I forced my hands to unclench. "All I'm asking is 5 minutes with my nephew." "Your nephew?" Harold's laugh had steel in it. "You have no legal standing here, Mark. No rights. Just because my daughter was foolish enough to marry your deadbeat brother doesn't mean—" "Don't!" The word came out low and hard. "Don't you dare talk about him." Harold's smile widened. "Go home. Next time you show up unannounced, I won't be so understanding." I backed down those perfect porch steps, feeling his eyes on me, but I wasn't leaving empty-handed. From my truck, I took photos of Caleb's lit window, the timestamp clear in each one. Shot a few of the driveway too, proving I was there when the call came in. Documenting incident at Preston residence, I spoke into my phone's voice recorder, keeping my tone professional. Arrived at 11:42 p.m. following distress call from minor child. Access denied by Harold Preston. Visible signs of potential physical abuse observed through second-story window. Harold's shape lingered behind the lace curtains, probably thinking he'd won this round. But I'd learned long ago that some fights aren't won with fists or shouting. They're won with paper trails and patience. I sat in my truck, punching in the child services hotline number I'd memorized weeks ago. My eyes stayed fixed on that upstairs window while the phone rang. "Hold on, buddy," I whispered, though Caleb couldn't hear me. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. First thing next morning, I walked into the county services building with a manila folder thick enough to choke on. Inside, a typed timeline, photos from my phone, and notes so detailed they'd make an accountant proud. Ever notice how paperwork feels heavier when it carries the weight of someone's future? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while I filled out form after form at the intake desk. Time of call, 11:17 p.m. Address, description of visible injuries, denial of access. My pen scratched against paper. Each detail another brick in the wall I was building. Mark? What a surprise! My shoulders tensed at that syrupy voice. Darlene Preston glided across the lobby in her county employee badge and pearl earrings, looking every bit the concerned grandmother. Amazing how someone could smile so wide while their eyes stayed cold as January frost. Just dropping off some paperwork, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Oh, let me make sure that gets priority handling. She plucked the stack from my hands before I could object. We take family concerns very seriously here. I watched her whisper something to the clerk, who nodded and dropped my forms into a tray marked External Review instead of Urgent Care. Real subtle. Your case number will be CPS 2023-4891, Darlene announced, like she was doing me a favor. We'll be in touch once it's processed. The clerk wouldn't meet my eyes. I memorized that number, knowing damn well where those papers were headed. Next stop, Oak Ridge Elementary. The morning bell had just rung when I found Ms. Ruiz in her classroom, arranging picture books on a low shelf. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the situation. I've been worried too, she admitted, glancing at Caleb's empty desk. He's missed 12 days this semester. When he does come in, he's withdrawn. Yesterday, he wouldn't take off his sweater during art, even though it was warm. I need documentation, I said. Attendance records, behavioral notes, anything showing a pattern. She nodded, already pulling out a gradebook. I'll copy everything I have. But Mark? Her voice dropped. You should know they've already filed for permanent custody. The hearing's set for 6 weeks from today. My stomach dropped. 6 weeks. Harold and Darlene had been planning this, positioning their pieces while I'd been telling myself Caleb was okay. Back home, I cleared a wall in my office and hung up a fresh calendar. That court date got circled in red marker, June 15th. Below it, I started mapping out what I needed week by week. Week 1. Medical records, school documentation. Week 2. Witness statements, character references. Week 3. Home study prep, financial records. Week 4. Legal filing. Deadlines. Week 5. Evidence review. Week 6. Final prep. I texted Ms. Ruiz. Thanks for your help today. Can we connect tomorrow about those records? The message showed as delivered, but no reply came. After an hour, I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. In my workshop, I printed out that case number in bold letters. CPS 2023-4891. Pinned it right next to the calendar where I'd see it every morning. The paper rustled slightly in the fan's breeze, like it was counting down with each flutter. 6 weeks suddenly felt like 6 minutes. I gripped the edge of my workbench, trying to steady my breathing. The sawdust-filled air that usually calmed me now felt thick in my lungs. Every tick of the wall clock echoed like a hammer strike. You'd think after 20 years of building things, I'd be used to working against deadlines. But this wasn't about meeting a project timeline. This was about saving a little boy who trusted me to be his hero. And from the way things were already moving, it was clear Harold and Darlene had a head start on making sure I failed. Ever notice how quickly a warm welcome can turn cold? Like walking into an air-conditioned room from summer heat. The change hits you all at once. The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Ridge Elementary's empty parking lot as I pulled in. My briefcase held everything neatly labeled: medical release forms, records requests, even a draft character statement ready for Ms. Ruiz's signature. I'd learned early in contracting that organization wins half the battle. The school secretary buzzed me through, but something felt off the moment I stepped into that cheerful kindergarten classroom. Yesterday's open conversation had been replaced by a wall of silence. Ms. Ruiz kept arranging papers on her desk, like maybe if she shuffled them long enough, I'd disappear. Morning, I said, keeping my voice light. I brought those forms we discussed. She glanced up, then quickly away. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened an already straight stack of worksheets. Mr. Ellison, I'm sorry, but I can't. Can't what? The question came out sharper than I meant it to. Ms. Ruiz lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. People talk in this town. Careers end over misunderstandings. She smoothed her skirt, still avoiding my eyes. I have a mortgage. My daughter's starting college next year. The threat fingerprints were as clear as smudges on glass. I'd seen this dance before. Harold and Darlene's specialty was making problems vanish by making people afraid. I could almost hear their words. Such a shame if something affected your teaching record. Hard to find work with a troublemaker reputation. I understand, I said quietly, tucking the forms back in my briefcase. No point pushing someone who'd already been pushed harder from the other side. Back in my truck, I updated my timeline. Week 1, Day 2. School ally compromised. Cross that off the list. Time to switch tracks. I called the best custody attorney I could find on short notice. The receptionist quoted me a consultation fee that made my teeth clench, but I booked it anyway. While I waited for her to email the intake forms, I started compiling everything I had. Screenshots of Caleb's call log, saved voicemails, dated photos from that night at Harold's house. Next up, medical records. The pediatric clinic's number rang 4 times before someone picked up. Valley Children's. How can I help you? I need visit summaries for Caleb Preston, I said, trying to sound official. I'm his uncle, Mark Ellison. I have medical power. All child welfare cases must go through county services, she recited, like she'd been waiting for my call. Have a nice day. The dial tone hummed in my ear. Of course. Darlene's fingerprints again. I tried focusing on work. Had a deck estimate due tomorrow. But my measuring tape kept shaking as Caleb's voice echoed in my head. They keep hitting me. The bruise I'd glimpsed behind that curtain. 6 weeks on that damn calendar mocking me. From the wall. Fine. If they wanted to play hardball through official channels, I'd bury them in paperwork. Every photo time-stamped. Every call logged. Every denial of access documented. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. The workshop always settled my nerves. Something about the smell of fresh lumber and the steady hum of tools. I set up my laptop next to my table saw and started drafting an affidavit, laying out everything chronologically. The cursor blinked between details about that night at Harold's house when my phone buzzed. A text from Ms. Ruiz. I'm sorry, but I cannot be involved in this situation. Please do not contact me further. I set the phone face down. Added another line to my affidavit. School staff expressed fear of retaliation when asked to provide student records. Then I went back to typing, the keys clicking in rhythm with my jaw clenching. 2 days of calling. Every family law office in 3 counties had left my voice raw. But I finally landed a consultation with Patricia Chen. Her office sat in one of those restored Victorian houses downtown, the kind where the trim work tells you exactly what kind of retainer they expect. But after the school dead end, I couldn't afford to pinch pennies. The lobby smelled like leather and lemon polish. My evidence binder looked out of place on the antique coffee table. Just a basic black 3-ring filled with phone records, photos, and incident logs. Same system I used for job sites, except these pages documented bruises instead of building materials. Ms. Chen's handshake was firm, her gray suit crisp. Walk me through your timeline, Mr. Ellison. I'd rehearsed this part. Started with Caleb's call, then Harold's threats, Darlene's interference, the teacher's withdrawal. Each point backed by dated exhibits tabbed in the binder. 20 minutes in, she held up a hand. You document like someone who's dealt with liability issues before. Contractor, I explained. Learned early that memories fade, but paperwork doesn't. She nodded, flipping through my photos. This level of detail helps. We can file for emergency temporary custody within a week. The bruising alone. A week? My hands clenched. Caleb's there right now. I understand your urgency. Her tone was practiced gentle. But rushing makes mistakes, and mistakes give them ammunition. 1 week to do it right. The logic stung, but she wasn't wrong. I signed the retainer and handed over my credit card, trying not to wince at the amount. Walking out, I checked my countdown calendar. 5 weeks until the hearing. At least now we had momentum. Back at the shop, I locked up early to start on the declarations she needed. The familiar smell of sawdust helped steady my hands as I typed. 3 hours in, my email pinged. Subject, urgent, withdrawal of representation. From Patricia Chen, esque. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Dear Mr. Ellison, due to an unforeseen conflict that has come to light, our firm must withdraw from your case effectively immediately. Your retainer will be refunded in full. We regret any inconvenience. I called her office. Straight to voicemail. Called again. Same thing. On my 3rd try, a young voice answered. Probably the paralegal I'd met earlier. She hesitated when I asked what happened. Look, she said finally, lowering her voice. I shouldn't tell you this, but Mr. Preston's stepfather knows people. Important people. The kind who make phone calls about keeping certain law firms' contracts renewed. A pause. I'm sorry, really. The line went dead. I sat there in my darkening workshop, watching 3 days of progress evaporate in 3 minutes. The calendar's red circle seemed to pulse mockingly on the wall. You ever have one of those moments where fury goes so deep it comes out the other side as calm? That's where I landed. Started making lists, methodical as laying out tools for a job. But looking at that calendar, something shifted. Playing by their rules wasn't working. They owned the rule book. I needed to change the game. Not break laws, but maybe bend them around some uncomfortable corners. I grabbed a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, I wrote, unconventional, but legal. The list grew slowly. My neighbor Tom stopped by as I was writing. He does security work. Knows everybody. I mentioned needing someone who could dig deep without flinching at connected names. Frank Dalton, he said immediately. Ex-cop turned PI. Specializes in custody cases. Man's like a bloodhound with paper trails. I added the name to my list, circled it twice. Sometimes the best path forward isn't the official one. It's the one that goes around the gatekeepers. The Sunrise Diner lived up to its name at 6 a.m., all chrome and morning glare. I'd picked it because it was 20 miles outside Harold's sphere of influence. The breakfast crowd wouldn't roll in for another hour, which suited me fine. Private conversations need empty booths. Frank Dalton didn't look like what I'd expected. No trench coat, no mysterious air. Just a weathered face above a plain button-down and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. His coffee cup was already empty when I slid into the booth. Tom vouched for you, I said, setting my binder on the table. Said you handle custody cases. Among other things, he pulled out a notebook that looked like it had survived a war. Show me what you've got. I walked him through it all. Caleb's call, the bruise photos, Harold's threats. Each time I mentioned Darlene's name, his pen made little circles on the page. By the time our third coffee arrived, he had sketched out what looked like a flowchart with the county building at the center. See this? He tapped his pen on Darlene's name. 23 years in that office. People like that don't just have influence. They are the influence. Forms get misplaced. Reports get rerouted. Intake notes mysteriously vanish. That's exactly what's happening, I said, thinking of Ms. Ruiz and the lawyer's sudden withdrawal. Course it is. He flipped to a fresh page. Child neglects like termites. Works best in the dark. Teachers get reminded about budget cuts. Clinic staff discover their parking privileges under review. Everything gets just messy enough to make helping the kid more trouble than it's worth. My jaw clenched. So what's our play? First, we document the documentation, he wrote as he talked. Every office Darlene touches, we request their records. When those records disappear, we get camera footage of the building, visitor logs, computer access timestamps, build a pattern of who touched what, when. And that helps us how? Because people get sloppy when they think they're protected. They leave fingerprints, literal and figurative. He looked up. I'll need authorization for surveillance. Legal surveillance, he added, seeing my expression. Public spaces only. I nodded. Whatever it takes within the law. Meanwhile, you keep your business running smooth as silk. No changes in routine. Nothing that suggests you're doing anything but accepting their roadblocks. That afternoon, I filed fresh records requests at Caleb's school and medical clinic. Both responses came back the same day. We regret to inform you that the files you've requested are no longer in our system. Files that had existed last week. You know that feeling when the floor isn't quite where you expect it to be? That's how it hit me. This wasn't just interference anymore. This was systematic erasure. I called Frank immediately. Right on schedule, he said, not sounding surprised. Get me the exact times you visited each office. I'll pull lobby camera feeds, sign-in sheets. Someone had to physically access those systems to delete those files. How long will that take? Depends how deep the rabbit hole goes. But here's what I can tell you now. Records don't vanish for no reason. They vanish because money talks. I glanced at my workshop calendar. 4 weeks left until the hearing. Follow the money? I asked. Follow the money, Frank confirmed. Because people like Harold and Darlene, they're not in this for custody. They're in it for something that fits in a bank account. My phone buzzed just after midnight. I was still in the workshop going over invoices. These days, sleep felt like wasting precious time. Frank's number lit up the screen. Got something, he said without preamble. Ever hear of foster care stipends? I set down my pencil. State money for taking in kids? Bingo. Monthly payments to offset costs. Food, clothes, that kind of thing. Papers shuffled on his end. Thing is, those payments leave a trail. Every deposit, every routing number. And our friend Darlene's name keeps popping up on some interesting transactions. The satisfaction in his voice was unmistakable. Regular deposits, same amount each month. Started right after Caleb moved in. My throat went dry. They're getting paid to keep him? More than that. They're double-dipping. More shuffling. See? Legitimate foster parents get one stipend per child. But I'm seeing multiple payments here. Same dates, same amounts, different account numbers. All flowing back to accounts Darlene controls. I grabbed my laptop. Send me what you've got. Already did. Check your email. A pause. We'll need affidavits ready for subpoena requests. Bank records. Transfer. Authorizations. The works. On it. I was already pulling up templates. What kind of proof are we talking about? Screenshots of the transactions. Metadata from the bank routing. Timestamps that match Caleb's check-ins at the county office. He gave a low whistle. They got greedy, Mark. Left footprints all over this thing. My printer hummed as I pulled up the files. The ledgers told a story clearer than any witness statement. Columns of numbers, dates, deposit records. I grabbed a highlighter, started marking the duplicates. Yellow lines connected like dots on a crime map. Look at the reporting cycles, Frank said. Every time they file paperwork on Caleb, there's a matching deposit within 48 hours. Been going on since day one. You ever see something so perfect it scares you? That's how this evidence felt. The pieces fit too well, clicked together like a combination lock. This is why they're blocking everything, I said, the realization hitting hard. Every report we file threatens their cash flow. Exactly. Can't claim multiple stipends on a kid who's got outside eyes on him. Those bruises Caleb's sporting, they're not just from neglect. They're from a business model. I spread the papers across my workbench. Walk me through how we present this. Chain of custody for digital evidence. Authentication protocols. I want it bulletproof. Already tagged and time-stamped everything. Got witnesses at the bank ready to verify the records. His voice hardened. But here's the beautiful part. Proof of theft proves motive. Shows why they're pressuring teachers, buying off lawyers, burying reports. Money trail connects all the dots. My hands were steady as I organized the documents into a fresh binder. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was leverage. The kind that could crack their whole system wide open. I know a clean attorney across the county line, Frank added. One Harold can't reach. Once we've got everything indexed and authenticated, we can move fast. I checked my calendar. 3 weeks, 4 days until the hearing. For the first time since Caleb's call, I felt the ground solidifying under my feet. Frank, I said, what's our next step? We follow the money deeper. Because here's what keeps me up. Darlene's the clearinghouse, but she's not working alone. Someone else is signing off on these placements, pushing papers through the system. I stared at the network of highlighted numbers. He was right. Somewhere in this web of transactions lurked other names. Other hands helping to keep Caleb trapped and invisible. The question was, how far up did this scheme really go? The next morning hit like any other. Coffee steam rising from my travel mug, keys jingling as I unlocked the shop door. Except Tom was already there, leaning against his truck with arms crossed tight enough to wrinkle his company polo. 20 years of friendship lived in the creases of that shirt. We need to talk, he said. You know that moment when your stomach drops before your brain catches up? That's what his tone did to me. I unlocked the office, flipped on the lights, and waited. Harold's been making calls, Tom said, following me in. To clients, suppliers, half the Chamber of Commerce. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Says you're coming unhinged over this custody thing. Ranting at teachers, harassing county workers, getting ready to make a scene in court. I set my mug down carefully. And you believe him? Doesn't matter what I believe. Matter is what people are saying. He shifted his weight. Look, I've got kids in school here. Mortgage to pay. Can't have the business tied to all this. All what, Tom? Fighting for a kid who needs help? It's how you're fighting it. His voice hardened. Hiring private investigators? Digging through people's bank records? Harold says you're going to drag everyone through the mud just to score points with a judge. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. I'd known Harold would retaliate once Frank started digging. But this was surgical. I need to protect the brand, Tom said. I'm dissolving our partnership. Effective immediately. Just like that, 15 years of building something together crumbled. I watched him slide a stack of papers across my desk. Dissolution agreements, client transfer forms, crew reassignments. All prepared in advance, all waiting for my signature. You ever try to calculate falling speed while you're still in free fall? That's what the next hour felt like. Running numbers, watching our shared contracts evaporate, seeing crew schedules collapse. The business I'd built from sawdust and sweat was bleeding out in real time. I pulled up our accounts once Tom left. Between Frank's retainer, the failed lawyer fees, and basic operating costs, my runway was measured in weeks, not months. The calendar on my wall seemed to pulse. 2 weeks until the hearing. The red circle I'd drawn looked less like a deadline and more like a target now. My phone buzzed. Frank, updating me on bank records he'd subpoenaed. More proof of Harold and Darlene's scheme. More hours on the clock. I couldn't tell him to stop. Wouldn't tell him to stop. But fear edged every word of my reply. I spent the afternoon calling vendors, suppliers I'd known for years. Some offered payment extensions. Others, hearing the tremor in my voice, asked for cash up front. I moved everything from my personal savings into a separate account. A firewall, to keep Frank paid and working. The evidence was too important to lose now, even if it cost me everything else. The job phones stayed silent. No surprise there. Harold's poison had already spread through the contractor network. I filed an emergency brief documenting the smear campaign, attached sworn statements from 2 suppliers willing to verify Harold's calls. Then I drafted a motion for continuance as backup. If we couldn't finish the investigation before funds ran dry, maybe a sympathetic judge would buy us time. Evening crept in. I sat alone under fluorescent shop lights, surrounded by tools that might not be mine much longer. 20 years of muscle memory lived in those handles. Which wrench for which job. How to true a level with one tap. The radio that usually filled the space with classic rock stayed off. Some silences you need to sit with. Let them teach you what they're worth. A text lit up my phone. Frank, asking to meet tomorrow. More bank records to review. More proof to process. I stared at the message, at the calendar, at the empty office where Tom's desk used to be. They say the truth comes with a price tag. I just never figured it would cost me everything I'd built to save someone else's child. The shop felt different that night. Emptier somehow. Like all the hopes I'd stored there had leaked out through the cracks. I pulled the folder from my briefcase. Crisp manila with "Surrender" written in black Sharpie across the top. Inside lay the papers my backup attorney had drafted. Voluntary withdrawal of custody petition. Request for supervised visitation. Statement of non-contest. You know that moment when you're cutting trim and the saw blade starts to bind? That split second where you have to decide, power through or back off before something breaks. That's where I was, sitting at my desk with those papers laid out like funeral arrangements. I opened my evidence binder one last time. A flash of color caught my eye. Caleb's drawing from last Christmas, tucked in the back pocket. Stick figures holding hands under a crayon sun. Uncle Mark plus me, scrawled in wobbly letters. The paper had that soft feel, like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I pulled up Frank's number. 3 rings before he answered. Frank, I've been thinking, don't. His voice cut through like a chisel. Whatever you're about to say, don't. They've taken everything, Frank. The business, my reputation, my savings. Even if we win tomorrow, what kind of life can I give him? Better than bruises and fear. A pause, then softer. Be at the courthouse early. That's all I'm saying. The line went dead before I could argue. I stared at the phone, then at the surrender papers, then at Caleb's drawing. The silence in the shop pressed in like setting concrete. Standing felt like moving through mud. I clicked off the lights, each shadow stretching longer than usual. The door locked with its familiar double click. How many thousand times had I heard that sound? Tonight it seemed final, like sealing a tomb. I set the surrender folder by the door. Just in case. Just as backup. The office cot creaked as I lay down. 48 hours of fight left in me. Tops. Maybe less. The ceiling fan spun lazy circles, and my mind spun with it. Every conversation with Harold played back like a bad movie. He's none of your business anymore. We know what's best for the boy. Some people shouldn't meddle in family matters. Then Darlene's sugary venom at the county office. Of course we'll process your complaint right away, dear. These things have a way of sorting themselves out. Ms. Ruiz's fearful silence echoed loudest of all. Sleep came in fragments. Every hour the clock's red numbers reminded me time was running out. At 4 a.m., I gave up trying. The surrender folder sat by the door like a coward's life raft. I made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, but couldn't stomach more than a sip. My court suit hung on the office door, the same one I'd worn to my brother's funeral. Fitting, in a way. Another day of saying goodbye, maybe. Dawn broke gray and thin as I loaded the car. The surrender folder went in last, riding shotgun like an unwanted passenger. Main Street was empty, just my headlights sweeping past dark storefronts where people used to wave when I drove by. The courthouse loomed ahead, all red brick and white columns. Important things happened under those columns. Justice, sometimes. Deals with the devil, other times. Today would decide which. I parked in the same spot I'd used for countless building permits and contract reviews. Amazing how familiar things look different when your whole world hangs in the balance. The hallway clock read 8:47 when I stepped inside. The marble floors squeaked under my dress shoes. A few early birds shuffled papers. On the benches. Lawyers, maybe, or other souls fighting their own battles. "All rise," the bailiff called. "Case number 2023 CV 4891 in the matter of guardianship." I gripped the surrender folder, still unsigned. Still waiting. Still asking if I had enough left to fight. The courtroom doors swung open. You know that moment when you're demolishing an old wall and find something that changes everything? That's what hit me as I sat at the counsel table, watching Harold smirk from across the aisle. No lawyer beside me. Couldn't afford one after what they'd done to my business. Just my motion packet and Frank's steady presence in the gallery behind me. The morning clerks shuffled papers and whispered between themselves. Printers hummed. A few early observers had drifted in, probably hoping to see Harold's crew crush another small timer. I could feel their stares boring into my back. My hands were steady, though. Funny how calm you get when you're past caring about anything except doing right by family. The judge was reviewing preliminary motions, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. That's when I felt it. Frank's presence closer. Then a soft slide of something across the table. A manila folder, sealed with evidence tape. I glanced back. Frank gave me the smallest nod I'd ever seen. The folder felt heavy as lead when I picked it up. Inside, the first page hit me like a hammer blow. Bank statements with Darlene's name, highlighting foster care stipend deposits that never went to Caleb's care. Page after page of notarized proof, showing exactly where the money went instead. But it was the photos that stopped my breath. Crystal clear, high-resolution prints of every bruise I'd seen on Caleb that night through the window. The ones that had mysteriously vanished from every official file, each one labeled with dates, times, and locations. Each one backed by chain of custody affidavits, showing exactly how they'd been recovered and verified. You ever have a room spin underneath you? That's what happened. Only this time, it was spinning in our favor. My grip tightened on the folder as I stood. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have evidence that was illegally suppressed." The judge's eyes narrowed above those reading glasses. "Approach." I laid out the documents one by one. The photos, the bank records, the retrieval logs that proved when and how the evidence had been hidden. Each piece clicked into place, like perfectly cut joints in fine carpentry. The judge studied each photo for what felt like hours. His frown deepened as he flipped through the financial records. The courtroom had gone dead silent. You could have heard a nail drop. "Counsel," he said finally. "I'm calling a 15-minute recess. I'll review these in chambers." He gathered the documents with careful hands. "Bailiff, all rise." As the judge disappeared through his chamber door, I risked a glance across the aisle. Harold sat rigid as a fence post, his earlier smirk carved to stone. Darlene's eyes were fixed on the floor, her hands twisting a tissue into confetti. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling the smooth wood under my palms. Caleb's voice from that night call echoed in my head. "Please, Uncle. They keep hitting me." The bailiff's voice cut through my thoughts. 15-minute recess. Please remain in the building. Frank appeared at my elbow. "Let's get some air." We walked into the corridor together. The storm clouds rolling over the courthouse roof matched the churning in my gut. Through the tall windows, I could see them building, dark and heavy with promise. "How?" I asked Frank quietly. "Sometimes evidence isn't lost," he replied. "Sometimes it's just waiting for the right person to find it." I watched those clouds gather, thinking about Caleb, about promises kept and broken, about justice grinding slow but fine. 15 minutes stretched out like 15 years. You know how 15 minutes can feel like forever? I spent each second of that recess pacing the courthouse hallway, wearing a path in the carpet like I was sanding down rough wood. Every time the chamber door creaked, my heart jumped. When we finally filed back in, the tension could have snapped a steel beam. The judge's face had changed. Gone was the neutral expression from earlier. His jaw was set tight, the kind of look you see on someone who's discovered rot behind what seemed like solid walls. "We're back on record," he announced, shuffling papers with deliberate care. "Mr. Ellison, please walk the court through your evidence." I stood, touching each tabbed section like checking off a materials list. "Your Honor, starting with Exhibit A. These are bank statements showing foster care stipend payments to an account under Darlene Mitchell's name. The deposits align with Caleb's placement dates." "Objection!" Harold's lawyer shot up. "Chain of custody on these records." "If I may, Your Honor," Frank's steady voice came from behind me as he approached with a leather portfolio. "I have declarations from 3 county clerks and complete sign-in logs documenting when and how these records were accessed and preserved." The judge accepted Frank's papers, studied them briefly, then fixed Harold's lawyer with a stern look. "Objection overruled. Continue, Mr. Ellison." I moved to the financial timeline. Exhibit B shows duplicate deposits on these highlighted dates. Each one corresponds to a day Caleb was logged present at their house. But the funds, missing, the judge finished, flipping through his copy. No documented expenditures for the child's care. He turned to Darlene. "Mrs. Mitchell, would you care to explain these transactions?" Darlene's voice wavered. "There must be some clerical errors, Your Honor. Sometimes the system double posts for 18 months? The judge held up a highlighted page. "And always on dates matching the minor's documented check-ins?" The room went so quiet you could hear papers settling. I glanced at Frank, who gave me that microscopic nod again. "Exhibit C," I continued, "contains the photographs of Caleb's injuries with forensic timestamps and location data. These images were originally filed with Child Services but mysteriously vanished from their system. However, Your Honor," Harold's lawyer again, "these photos could have been altered. The metadata is intact," Frank interjected, presenting another document. "Full chain of custody from original capture through recovery, verified by 2 independent experts." The judge adjusted his glasses, studying the authentication reports. After a long moment, he set them down and looked straight at Harold and Darlene. "I've reviewed the relevant statutes," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Section 31-6 defines criminal neglect. Section 42-8 covers financial fraud and custodial matters." He paused, letting that sink in. "This court will be referring both matters to the district attorney's office before close of business today." I heard Darlene's sharp intake of breath. Harold's face had gone the color of old grout. "Before we proceed to custody findings," the judge continued, "I have several questions for both parties." He lifted his pen. "We'll start with Mrs. Mitchell explaining every withdrawal from the stipend account, matched against receipts for the child's care." Darlene's hands were shaking now. I could almost hear the screws tightening. "After that," the judge added, "we'll address the pattern of interference with school and medical records." He checked his watch. "I've cleared my afternoon calendar." The bailiff shifted, ready for a long session. I gripped the edge of my table again, counting seconds between breaths. Everything we'd fought for, every piece of evidence we'd salvaged was finally laid bare. Now we just had to wait for the final gavel. The one that would either save Caleb or condemn him to more years under their roof. I thought about my workshop calendar with its red circle, wondering if I'd be marking this date in victory or defeat. The judge shuffled his papers, preparing his first question, and the room held its breath. An hour into the afternoon, I'd watched Darlene fumble through every question about the stipend account. She couldn't produce a single receipt for Caleb's care. Not one movie ticket, doctor's bill, or clothing purchase. Just stammered excuses about misplaced paperwork that made less sense with each telling. The judge tapped his pen against the bench, that sharp little click that sounds like patience running dry. "Now then," he said, turning to Harold, "let's address the matter of Ms. Ruiz, Caleb's kindergarten teacher." Harold straightened his tie. "What about her, Your Honor?" "The court has a signed statement indicating you made certain suggestions about her employment prospects if she continued communicating with Mr. Ellison." The judge lifted a paper. "Would you care to explain?" "I never threatened anyone," Harold said, but his voice had that oily smoothness I'd heard too many times. "I've barely spoken to the school at all." "Interesting." The judge shuffled through his papers. "Because earlier today, you testified that you personally handled all school communications, including, and I quote, regular meetings with Caleb's teacher about his progress." He looked up. "Which version is accurate, Mr. Mitchell?" Harold's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I meant, let me be more specific," the judge cut in. "Did you or did you not tell Ms. Ruiz that speaking with Mr. Ellison would make things difficult for her teaching career?" The silence stretched. I could almost hear Harold's mind racing for an escape route. "Your Honor, I may have expressed some concerns about a yes or no will suffice." Harold's jaw clenched. Yes. The judge made a note, then picked up the stack of photos. Again. Each bruise on Caleb seemed to darken under his scrutiny. His eyes moved between the images and Darlene's ledger, narrowing slightly. "Bailiff," he called without looking up. "Please have Deputy Ross escort Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell to interview room 3 in the annex. They'll need to provide statements to our investigators before leaving the building." My chest tightened. I wanted to exhale, to feel some relief. But I'd learned the hard way, not to count victories before the gavel fell. A deputy appeared at the side door, gesturing with professional courtesy that barely masked his authority. Harold's face went from flushed to ashen in seconds. He gripped his lawyer's sleeve, whispering urgently. My phone vibrated. Frank's message was just one word: hold. I knew what he meant. Don't react. Don't smile. Don't give them anything to use later. The judge cleared his throat. This court will issue its custody determination after reviewing the investigators' findings from the annex interviews. He checked his watch. We'll reconvene when they're complete. The gallery began to empty, shoes shuffling on worn carpet. I watched Harold and Darlene follow the deputy, their shoulders stiff with desperate dignity. Their lawyer trailed behind, already looking defeated. When the room was nearly empty, I knelt in the back row. The wood was hard against my knees, but I barely felt it. I'm not what you'd call a prayer warrior. My conversations with God usually happen over sawdust and safety goggles. But right then, I needed every scrap of strength I could find. "Please," I whispered, "just let me keep him safe." The bailiff's keys jingled as he opened the door. "Sir? Judge wants everyone to wait in the hall." I stood, brushing dust from my slacks. The corridor clock showed 3:47. Somewhere in the annex, Harold and Darlene were about to learn exactly how many kinds of trouble they'd earned. But until that gavel came down one last time, Caleb's future was still balanced on its head. The bailiff held the door, sympathy in his tired eyes. I walked past him into the hallway's fluorescent glare, where the next wait began. Late afternoon sun streaked through the annex windows, painting long shadows across the courtroom floor as we filed back in. My hands were steady, but my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. You know that moment when your whole world hangs on someone else's next words? Yeah, that's where I was. The judge settled into his chair, adjusted his reading glasses, and cleared his throat. The sound echoed through the pin-drop silence. Having reviewed the evidence presented, including the investigators' findings from the annex interviews, this court finds clear and convincing proof of ongoing neglect. He paused, looking directly at me. Full legal and physical custody of Caleb Mitchell is hereby granted to Mark Ellison, effective immediately. My legs went weak. Frank's hand gripped my shoulder, keeping me upright. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court is referring the financial documentation to the district attorney's office for immediate review. Bailiff, please provide copies of exhibits A through F to the prosecutor's office. I barely registered Harold and Darlene's faces. The victory was still sinking in when the prosecutor approached us in the hallway. She carried a stack of fresh papers, ink still wet. "We're filing charges today," she said quietly. "Financial fraud for Mrs. Mitchell. Child neglect for Mr. Mitchell. They'll be served within the hour." It happened fast after that. The local paper's website posted the court filings before dinner. My phone started buzzing with notifications, neighbors sharing headlines, old friends expressing shock. The same people who'd turned their backs when Harold spread those lies about me were now sharing every detail of his downfall. By sunset, Harold and Darlene's carefully built castle of influence was crumbling. Their country club friends suddenly had other commitments. Church committee members stepped down rather than be associated with them. Even their lawn service dropped them. Kind of funny how quick reputation can wilt in a small town. But none of that mattered as much as the moment I drove up my driveway with Caleb in the passenger seat. His small hand clutched that old toy hammer he loved, the plastic one he'd always grab whenever he visited my workshop. "That's for you," I said, pointing to the boxed swing set in the truck bed. "Want to help me build it?" His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Really?" The moon was rising as I dug the post holes, mixed concrete, and bolted the frame together. Caleb helped with his toy hammer, tapping each beam after I secured it. Pure focus on his face, just like his dad used to get when we built things together. "Uncle Mark?" he asked as I tightened the final nut. "Is this really my home now?" "Yeah, buddy. Forever." He climbed onto the swing, and I gave him a gentle push. His laughter cut through the evening air, washing away weeks of dread and worry. His shoes skimmed the grass, then lifted higher, higher, like he was trying to touch those first stars peeking through the twilight. I stepped back, watching him swing free and happy, and felt something settle deep in my chest. A certainty, a peace. Right then, I knew what I needed to tell him. Not just for tonight, but for all the nights ahead. "Hey, Caleb," I said softly. "Remember this. No one breaks family who fights for it." He smiled, pumping his legs harder, reaching for the sky. And in that moment, with sawdust still clinging to my shirt and the wrench warm in my hand, I knew we'd be all right.